ADHD workplace adjustments and well-being. What does ADHD look like? I wish I can show you a typical picture of someone with ADHD and say, here, look out for this person, they have ADHD. But if you're watching this, then you'll know that there has been a huge increase in the number of adults diagnosed with ADHD and other co-occurrences later in life. So what ADHD looks like is simply different when we apply the diversity in gender, culture, class, ethnicity, sexual identity, and even life stages, because each one of us has internalized the rules society embedded within us to function as members within it. Typically though, the diagnostic criteria for ADHD in DSM-5 tend to fit well with school-age children, those aged 6 to 12, and never validated in those above age of 16. The three common ADHD subtypes are the inattentive type, hyperactive impulsive type, and combined type. Over the last decade, researchers had new ways of looking at ADHD through the life cycle. By the end of 2019, this re-evaluation of the fundamental aspects of ADHD led the European Union to issue its 10-year update of the Consensus Guidelines on Adult ADHD, redefining adolescent and adult ADHD to include emotional regulation as one of the 6 fundamental features of the ADHD syndrome. Inattention and hyperfocus, impulsivity, hyperactivity, emotional dysregulation, excessive mind wandering, and behavioral self-regulation. And what causes these key features of ADHD? Inattention and hyperfocus. When you find it hard to focus on something or someone until you find it impossible to move your attention away when you hyperfocus on something that you find interesting. Hyperactivity. For girls and adults, especially with masking, this looks like hyperactivity in the mind. For example, having multiple thoughts pop in their brain that some people have likened the ADHD brain to a popcorn brain or bees in the brain. Impulsivity. Leaving a job, blurting out something you don't mean to say, or responding, changing romantic partners. Emotional dysregulation. The type of emotional dysregulation that is characteristic to ADHD is linked to difficulties regulating emotions such as irritability, anger, and frustration. They also tend to be short-lived and exaggerated, often triggered by something or someone, lasting a few hours rather than a sustained period of time. ADHDers are susceptible to rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD, which is when one can perceive criticism and feedback as an extreme sense of rejection and feel the pain in their body. RSD is overwhelming, and it's a sensation that a person may experience in response to something that they perceive as rejection or criticism. But it is a serious condition that can result in low mood and self-esteem, and it is not a person being overly sensitive. Excessive mind wandering. There is a persistent pull away from the task you're doing, a distractible mental state that makes you drop what you're doing and jump to the next thing before the task is finished. Behavioral self-regulation. This is associated with disorders of executive function, such as inhibition, working memory. These include problems organizing, prioritizing, and initiating work, focusing, and sustaining and shifting attention to tasks, regulating alertness, sustaining effort, and processing speed, managing frustration, regulating emotions, utilizing working memory, and accessing recall. The ADHD brain, often described as a popcorn brain, where ideas go a-popping all day long, or bees in the brain, which makes it hard for us to focus on demand. Turns out that neurobiology and neurochemistry is unique in the brain with ADHD compared to those without. We have a different structure and size. The amygdala and hippocampus is slightly smaller. This hints at issues with regards to emotional regulation and impulsivity. And overall average size of the brain is smaller too. Our brain's developmental pace is also on average 3 years slower than our peers. And this impacts our executive functioning because your brain's frontal lobe doesn't fully mature until we reach 35 years of age. It has been said that many ADHDers will not match emotional maturity of a 21-year-old until their late 30s. The lower brain activity. There is a lower brain activity in prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal area of the brain houses the executive functions, and they are responsible for many tasks that I just mentioned before, such as planning, organizing, paying attention, timekeeping, and emotional reactions. The ADHD brain has imbalances in neurotransmitter levels. Neurotransmitters are proteins that help us carry the signal from one part of the brain to the other and are available at imbalanced levels. What this means is that some regions of the brain have higher levels of neurotransmitter and some regions have less. For example, the neurotransmitters that are implicated in the ADHD brain. Dopamine is involved in movement, motivation, memory, pleasure and reward, and norepinephrine is involved in the fight or flight response. These are present at different levels, not necessarily deficient all throughout, as don't forget, there are often co-occurrences too, and ADHD rarely travels alone. You're probably not surprised to learn that ADHD co-occurs with other conditions, and so the neurodivergents with ADHD often have co-occurrences of autism spectrum condition. In fact, that the percentage is up to 70%, and Tourette's syndrome, so 50 to 90% of Tourette's have ADHD. And dyslexia, and that's around 35 to 40% also have ADHD. Dyspraxics, around 22%. Not forgetting sensory processing disorder, anxiety, and depression. How your ADHD or autism or Tourette's or dyspraxia manifests depends on so many factors, such as nature versus nurture, as we have 86 billion brain cells, which rewires and fires depending on whether we receive the stimulus to fire within the environment in which we were born and raised in and lived in today. Now let's look at some of the higher rates of co-occurrences with ADHD, autism, and Tourette syndrome. ADHD and autism are sister conditions because the co-occurrence is up to 70%. So what does ADHD look like? And that's autism ADHD. So someone who craves novelty and wants change, but also really wants structure as they crave familiarity and routine. One can struggle to articulate their thoughts when they have challenge with communicating. What I don't tell you is that often when you're medicated for ADHD, the autistic traits that you've managed to keep under wraps come out in technicolor. And this can impact your social, sensory, thought patterns, and many other overlapping areas for these two neurodivergents. As for Tourette syndrome, the co-occurrence is so high at more than 50 to 90% with ADHD that many overlapping traits may result in one diagnosis being missed, or on rare occasions, Tourette's may be misdiagnosed as ADHD. Please note that some ADHDers with Tourette's have learned how to hide their tics, which can take a huge amount of effort, resulting to exhaustion when they're by themselves. Due to the stigma against ADHD, which were perpetuated by the media for over a century, many ADHDers have fallen under the radar. With recent awareness by lived experience advocates, there has been a startling rise in adult diagnosis of ADHD and neurodivergence are now being diagnosed in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, through to their 70s. For example, in 2021, there was a 3,200% increase in women who took to an online test via clinical partners to see if they have ADHD compared to just 2 years previously. Not just the gender bias in diagnosis, but also the ethnicity, cultural, sexuality bias in the pre-assessment rating scales led to many people from these groups to be underdiagnosed. Gifted and intelligent individuals, girls and women, inattentive men, LGBTQ community, the ethnic minority groups, and disadvantaged socioeconomic groups. To prepare for an ADHD diagnosis in the UK, you need to arm yourself with all the information you can get, and so really learn all you can. To be diagnosed with ADHD, the syndrome has to have existed before the age of 12 and has to exist in more than 2 settings, so not just in your home life but also the work life. Do the right online tests and bring it to the GP. Do you use Right to Choose service or the NHS? To prepare for semi-structured interview, you can use the DIVA-5, which is 10 years purchase, and this is created by the DIVA Foundation, which has questions laid out in the style of semi-structured interview that your formal assessment will entail, so you can prepare for it beforehand. I included a picture of DIVA 2 here as this is free to download if you'd like to check it out before buying DIVA 5. After the diagnosis, welcome to the ADHD grief cycle. It will take you through multiple stages: being in denial, angry about being misdiagnosed, mistreated and misunderstood, bargaining with the world, and depression, and finally acceptance. The key thing is to understand that you're more than your diagnosis. Depending on whether you're getting the right support, you might be in this cycle for a while, because it's a cycle that can repeat itself. So join a supportive community of like-minded people. When you have spent decades flying under the radar, there's a chance you have experienced some form of trauma and mental health difficulties. So I really recommend you find an ADHD-informed therapist or look into cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy for intense emotions, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a great option as it doesn't make you think that you're broken and need fixing, or even trauma therapy such as somatic therapy or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR therapy, is a structured therapy that can encourage the patient to briefly focus on the trauma. This picture was illustrated by James Bailey, also known as James the Scribe, and this was taken from Professor Susan Young's talk on girls with ADHD. As you can see, the impact begins in early years in school, all the way through to adolescence with friendships, and through to the workplace and beyond. So in the workplace, it looks like being overwhelmed, burnout, anxiety, depression, and some more flexibility is required to juggle life events where one is going into pregnancy or maternity stage, menopause, through to resignation, and causing underutilized strengths. ADHD requires a lifetime of management, and given the right support by professionals, your own family, and friends, you have every ability to thrive. I ran a poll this year with my online community via LinkedIn and Instagram, and I asked them, life after diagnosis, does it get better? The results showed that on LinkedIn, 83% of people receive support, while 18% have not. Whilst on our Instagram community, it was not as clear, with 55% said they have received support and 45% said they have not. And because my IG community had more women who are undiagnosed, the people on this platform aren't always on LinkedIn, meaning they might not necessarily have the resources to obtain a private diagnosis and therefore funded workplace support that they need, which is only accessible to those self-employed or freelancing or run their own business. So there are differences here, highlighting ADHD support disparity in terms of gender, socioeconomic status, and cultural divide. Why is it important to know yourself and how your brain is wired? Because the ADHD brain is inherently interest-focused. Dr. William Dawson, a psychiatrist specializing in ADHD, believes that ADHDers get engaged in 5 ways. It's when something holds their interest or fascination, when something is challenging or there is a sense of competition, and they find it hard to stop thinking about complex challenge that they need to solve. Something that is novel, which is often tied to creativity, and that is linked to default mode network, the seat of your imagination. The urgency that is usually brought on by a deadline, where adrenaline floods the brain, or passion, a connection to something that makes us feel alive, driven and lost and found at the same time, or what you call the IGNAP element. These IGNAP elements are essentially the fuel for the ADHD brain and need to exist for ADHDers to get motivated. So now if you have co-occurrences, such as autism, then there is more breadth and depth to what you're interested in and working on, meaning that your passion is lasting longer and you're able to think in process and see the scaffolding within an idea you are building. Internally, knowing how your brain is wired helps you with self-acceptance, being more forgiving with yourself and having more self-compassion. Do you need to stress yourself to the point of burnout to meet this deadline? What is more important to you? And externally, knowing how your brain is wired helps you advocate for yourself and get the adjustments you need at work and to find your element, which combines what you're naturally good at with what you love. If you close your eyes, can you see where you would like to be in 5 years? What does real happiness look like to you? To visualize the authentic life you want, you need to understand where you are now and how to get to where you want to be. The Japanese concept of ikigai illustrates a reason for being. However, ADHDers do not subscribe to the same rules. In addition to these themes, what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs, we are interest, challenge, novelty, passion, and variety driven. And we need to align ourselves to a reason for what we do that is bigger than us, and that is your why. In surveys with adults with ADHD, doing what you love and getting paid for it comes out as top of our priorities. Spend some time to think about what skills you like to bring to life, a job well done, or hobbies which fill you with energy and leave you feeling proud. What aligns with your values? And if you're like me, have this persistent itch to create something original in the world of work, then you really need to spend the time to understand what the world needs. Really agonize over a problem and fall in love with that problem and figure out how to solve it in 1,001 ways. And find out how you can bring your skills together at the edge, where the mastery of two separate worlds come together and you can be the bridge to connect them. For example, Elon Musk had an engineering background, but his success began with being at the edge, where he could speak the language those in both the engineering and business world understood. But how do you find yourself when you have so many interests? To help you develop a map of your strengths and a map of your challenges, I prepared the ADHD Owner's Manual Workbook, which comes with this course and you can download in the next step, to help you examine the choices you made in your life to fit in and begin to construct a more authentic life in the world of work, and to understand how your brain is wired and know how to work with it rather than against it, to discover what your strengths are and to know what support you need to overcome your challenges, and to tap into your productive zone. And you will have access to a one-page framework, a personal leadership canvas, which helps you contemplate your next steps. There is also an exercise you can do to map the jobs and hobbies you had enjoyed, so you can uncover the skills you want to showcase in your work. But remember, as Dr. Nat Hallowell said, and he is the author of ADHD 2.0 and many other books on ADHD, you need to find your right difficult, something that is challenging and matters to you. When those two come together, we tend to work our asses off. And once you find that, success and failure suddenly don't matter nearly as much. And what matters is that you find a game you love to play. And it is the love of the game that keeps you interested. If you look at triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. Because winning and losing are imposters. What matters most is the love of the game and that you found something you love to do. To find out what areas ADHDers find challenging and need support for, we ran the ADHD Best Practice at Work conference, where we brought ADHDers and the world of work together, with people in hiring positions, managers, DEI experts, HR specialists, and ADHD coaches. At the conference, we hosted a few mastermind rooms where everyone collaborated and came up with best practice approaches based on understanding of neurodivergence lived experiences. Beyond the standard practices for recruitment, retention, and maximizing one's productivity, we need to look at improving one's sense of belonging and culture via an intersectional lens so everyone can thrive. Many ADHDers found that the recruitment process as a whole marginalizes neurodivergence. Some feel this is due to struggles they've faced during their life, including exclusions from school and issues experienced in early employment. Others pinpointed to self-esteem issues linked to previous applications and interviews because neurodivergents often find it difficult to remember successes over challenges and struggles. This leads to low confidence and self-esteem even before the interviewing starts. A general lack of understanding about the nature of ADHD and other neurodivergence has created barriers in the recruitment process, with many employers reluctant to hire ADHDers or worrying they won't fit into the existing team because of the traits they display. In turn, this reticence leads to ADHDers not being willing to declare the diagnosis for fear of judgment or rejection. On the other side of that, If ADHD is not declared at the recruitment stage, there's a crucial opportunity missed for employers to make adjustments to processes and environments to make a working life more comfortable for an employee with ADHD. When it comes to interviews, the very setting of many interviews can be problematic for ADHDers. Most interviewers lack experience of neurodiversity and therefore don't understand why interviewees go off on tangents during an interview. This can leave a negative impression for all involved. In so many cases, the structure of existing teams does not allow for neurodiverse team members to join and fit well in those teams. The stereotypes of what neurodiversity and ADHD look like lead to negative experiences for all team members. And for team members with ADHD, imposter syndrome can be a real struggle, meaning strengths are undervalued and great employees could hold themselves back from reaching their full potential. There are so many solutions to the barriers outlined before, and some simple and quick to implement, and some that need a culture shift to really shake things up and to banish stereotypes and all-round education about the traits, advantages, and possibilities associated with ADHD. For a start, we all want to be welcome. Workplaces and employers need to be adaptive to the needs of every employee, not just those with neurodiversity. A greater understanding of ADHD and what it means to different people would enable employers and colleagues to understand and work alongside neurodiversity in a productive way. To have support with diagnosis, employees with ADHD should be encouraged to declare their diagnosis so that adaptations can be made to benefit everyone, and a system of a two-way feedback, not only from the recruitment process but on the whole, would benefit employers to understand the challenges and opportunities involved in working with people with ADHD. The interview process. When it comes to interviews, sending out the questions in advance would help ADHDers be more prepared and focused for the process, thereby reducing stress, saving time, and enabling everyone to perform to their best ability. And to have a general education around ADHD. To educate recruiters and employers about ADHD would be a positive step in making the process more accessible. Better yet, use recruiters with ADHD so they can add their perspective to the process. And provide coaching in the workplace, and this would benefit both ADHDers and their colleagues to aid an understanding of getting the best out of everyone. Research conducted into the impact of ADHD on employment has shown that ADHDers are much more likely to lose or leave their jobs due to the traits associated. There are some challenges for ADHDers around staying and feeling belong at work, and this is what we discuss. Some assumptions. Many felt that assumptions made by their colleagues, managers, and recruiters are damaging to their confidence, understanding, and relationships around ADHD in the workplace, and many reported not feeling heard during those conversations as a result. Difficulty fitting into the mold and dealing with differences. ADHDers were made to feel they had to fit in rather than making allowances for their differences they had and any adaptations that might help. Being singled out. On the other hand, ADHDers struggle with being singled out as different, with a need to manage their needs differently from other colleagues. And success at any price. Many stated that they would plow ahead, achieving success but ignoring their needs, leading to burnout and exhaustion. When asked what a sense of belonging and great reasons for retention meant for ADHDers, they highlighted the following areas: safety and security, feeling welcome and secure in an organization rather than being bolted on to a team. Acceptance of their diagnosis, a wide awareness of that diagnosis and having small adaptations made as a result. Lack of judgment from others, team-wide acceptance of ADHD and how the strengths associated with it can make a team better. A culture of compassion within the whole organization, top-down and managers. And feeling heard and understood. Struggles associated with ADHD are being listened to and acknowledged rather than dismissed. And being given the permission to thrive, which is such a relief after potentially having masked for so many years. Beside that, having a general awareness of neurodiversity and embracing how neurodivergence can enhance a team rather than cause problems. Having connections with colleagues, employers, and other ADHDers, knowing you're not alone is a huge relief and a source of support. Intersectionality. This means the interconnected nature of social categorizations, such as race, class, gender, physical disability, sexuality, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. These intersecting and overlapping social identities may be both empowering and oppressing. When ADHD goes hand in hand with another identity, such as race, class, gender, or sexuality, the challenges associated with it can be multiplied. Our delegates in a conference discuss some of their lived experiences of ADHD. With regards to cultural trauma, for those in cultures which attach shame to conditions like ADHD, for example, in certain Asian communities, there's an extra level of healing that an ADHDer has to go through to accept their diagnosis. Sexuality and ADHD. When ADHD crosses with sexuality, there is a real need for balancing of energy to deal with the different challenges each intersection presents. And gender differences. When the ADHD presents itself differently in men and women, there are challenges in dealing with stigmas. ADHD is not just about hyperactive boys, and sometimes women feel disbelieved or judged by the stereotype when declaring their ADHD diagnosis. Race and ADHD. Extra barriers are thrown up when race is an issue. In particular, Black women with ADHD experience discrimination and structural racism to a greater extent. Physical disability and long-term health condition. Are we aware of neurodivergence and intersection with physical disability, which can be invisible? The cultural and diversity within organizations also play a role. Where organizations are thriving on standardization, it is difficult to have a conversation around ADHD, as there is so much diversity even within diversity. So how do we support ADHDers with added difficulties of intersectionality? It's crucial that we take steps even further than simply accepting and adapting to an ADHD diagnosis. Intersectionality must be taken into consideration too. First, listen and learn. Take on the points and experiences being made by ADHD as an advocate for those who can't speak up for themselves. Also, check your privileges and prejudice. Everyone has privilege, and this needs to be checked before entering into any discussions. Provide anticipatory needs-based support and to allow the right people to speak on the topic, and encourage ADHDers to speak up about the challenges they face, or at least understand their experiences before speaking up on their behalf. And be aware of your behavior and language. Make sure your language and behavior is supportive and not inflammatory. And to provide a truly intersectional support, members of ERGs supporting neurodivergence should foster open dialogue and networking, not only among their own members, but also with members of other ERGs supporting gender, ethnicity, and other social categories. Community is power. It provides a safe space to learn, grow, and share experiences. Now, zooming into the day-to-day, we ran a survey asking ADHDers what areas of the daily work life that they find challenging and the type of support that truly makes a difference. The answers came back to this. Majority of them find managing the work itself difficult, with executive function challenges, and coping with the day-to-day flurry of activities in the office, and workload, the meetings that are long and without breaks, having to deal with their own internal perfectionism, exhaustion, and burnout, and to keep up with other non-ADHD colleagues, which they feel lack understanding of neurodivergence. And there is issues with professional relationships, especially with colleagues and managers, and socializing, and also communication. In the UK, if you identify as being neurodivergent and therefore class as a person with invisible disability, you can apply to a government scheme called Access to Work. Under the Equality Act 2010, the employer has legal duty to provide reasonable adjustments to job applicants and employees who disclose their disability. One common area of challenges, and these may exist across the spectrum in ADHDers, are executive function challenges. This tends to be the area that employers and Access to Work provide reasonable workplace adjustments for. When asked which departments within your organization would you approach to seek support? Many think that it is vital to get the support of line managers before going to the disability team or HR and occupational health, as the line manager support is imperative to the success of receiving workplace adjustments and the relationship going forward. However, ADHDers often need support with navigating professional relationships. For example, the manager and employee pairing. This means many ADHDers actually struggle with asking for what they need to do their best work due to communication and relationship difficulties. We will cover this in the subsequent section on communication. These are examples of reasonable workplace adjustments that you can provide for neurodivergence with ADHD. A support worker, giving you coaching for executive functioning, admin support for organizations such as a project manager if you're in employment, or a virtual assistant if you run your own business, a well-being and mental health support, flexibility in working patterns and ways of working, flexi hours. Some neurodivergents may prefer flexibility, especially if they're parents and have trouble with commute, or if they prefer their own space, or their productivity level may be different from what the standard working hour is. Some might prefer hybrid working if they prefer social interaction, and having dedicated space to focus, or if they need accountability, a work buddy is great for that. And short, regular check-ins rather than long meetings. Some may also prefer to work in sprints to meet a deadline rather than standard work hours across weeks and months. In short, it's important that employees are kept accountable, but to be provided flexibility too. You should have an awareness of learning styles, because not everyone learned the same way. So some people might prefer writing and reading, some people might prefer audio, a visual style, or kinesthetic way of learning. So having clear and alternative communication styles is really important. For example, to have email instructions on top of verbal instructions are really helpful. And so many ADHDers want to be in an emotionally calm and friendly and non-threatening environment where you can put your noise cancellation headphones on, and a place where you can have a consistent workspace and not induce anxiety, and where the environment within the office, the smells and sounds and people moving around it is not too overwhelming. There are various assistive technology that can help neurodivergence with executive function and even sensory challenges. What a time to be alive. And here are some examples: audio note takers, mind map tools, scheduling apps, to-do lists, project management tool, text-to-speech or speech-to-text software, and having an ambient noise app to drown out the noise. Effective communication in professional relationships. One of the biggest factors that dictate whether ADHDers keep or leave their jobs is their relationships with their coworkers and managers and the team they work in. Many ADHDers find it challenging to manage professional relationship due to trouble regulating emotional response to a feedback, which can be perceived as criticisms or RSD. This is why we need the manager-employee rapport to be the key to the success of conversations about workplace adjustments for ADHD. Do you have good rapport with your line manager? Or do you need someone in between to facilitate communication both ways? What is the number one rule in communication? You need to add value. I know that's the last thing you're thinking when you go to work and you want to tell your manager about your ADHD so they can help you. But as Stephen Covey said in his bestseller, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Humans are inherently self-serving, so we need to know what we can do with the information that you give us that will ultimately help us help you. And while people who lead a team should genuinely be empathic, they would also need to work out what their next steps are, or whether they have the time for that next step. So to prepare for your conversations with your manager, explore what it is about you that they need and can't afford to lose. To ask for support, you need to know yourself And what do you find difficult in the aspects of ADHD, any co-occurrences, and your life circumstances? If you're not confident about your rapport with your manager, do you need an ally or an advocate? Allies that work preferably in a more senior position than your manager, who are keen to support you and know that you're great at what you do, is not only beneficial, but necessary. When you speak about yourself, approach it from the angle of what your strengths are, and say something like, you hired me because I'm great at X, Y, and Z, but due to some traits associated with ADHD, like organization, time blindness, I can find some aspects of my job challenging. To work to my best ability, I would need. Flip the narrative. Sell yourself from strengths-based angle and not a deficit model. Comment about the stigma that prevailed over a century, and why not suggest neurodiversity workplace training so your team can get on board with how to be more neuro-inclusive. The access to work or workplace assessment can be a long-winded process, but they are really useful for getting support. You don't have to have a diagnosis to get support from access to work. And there are private companies like Genius Within and Lexic that provides neurodiversity workplace assessments, which comes with a fee. Discuss a plan going forward with your work, with your line manager, to find out what your and their expectations are. Agree and document a plan. In fact, document that conversation with your line manager too, so you have a plan to refer back to. Agree some follow-up dates to review to see if adjustments are working or not. Meanwhile, review your training gaps. What training would help you do your job better? And discuss communication needs. For example, if you don't understand the list of 10 things sent to you in an email, ask your line manager to color code or rank in order of importance and timescale. Find out what your company may offer in terms of mental health and well-being support. For example, benefits for emotional health are really sought after, as it will be really helpful to have access to a therapist to process what you're going through. ADHD and well-being. Life is made up of moments, and the people and relationships to help you celebrate the moments that count and overcome obstacles in your life. In an ADHDer's life, we play by different roles. With a neurobiology that craves stimulation, we also have challenges with regulating the highs and lows that come with this need to feel alive. This, along with having imbalances in neurotransmitters that help us feel content, it can lead to a constantly activated nervous system where we feel at odds with ourselves and the world. Our brains move fast, and because we're often bored, we schedule a flurry of activities into our everyday lives. So juggling work and life balance becomes impossible, and we become overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, depressed, hypervigilant, and even induce panic attacks in our overactivated state, followed by dissociation from everything. Yes, we are productive, innovative, and great at solving problems, but we need to rest, more so than those who don't have ADHD, because whether your neurodivergence is going to manifest as a strength or a disability depends so much on the environment you work and live in, the type of stressors, if any, in your daily life, whether you move enough, whether you have time to decompress, and whether you're getting the help you need to do your work. Central to the conversation about our well-being is our vagus nerve, the long nerve that runs through our body from our brain to our abdomen, and the polyvagal theory, which introduces what happens in our body and the nervous system, and explains how our sense of safety or danger or threat can impact our behavior. The states you can see here are the ventral state, rest and digest, where you're feeling socially connected and safe. The sympathetic state, the fight or flight, I'm in danger, or a state of chronic stress, where you mobilize, I need to run and fight back. Or dorsal state, when I can't cope and shut down, your immobilization state. The window of tolerance, a term coined by Dan Siegel, describes the state of arousal that is experienced by each individual. When we live within the window of tolerance, we are experiencing an optimal state of being, and we're able to be fully connected on both logic as well as our emotional states, and we're able to handle what disruptions may come up in our day-to-day experience. An individual may notice that we fluctuate within our window of tolerance on a regular basis, experiencing the full range of emotions that we as humans are intended to experience. A person may feel stress or pressure, but it doesn't bother you too much. We're able to learn, grow, and relate to ourselves and others. This is the ideal place to be. However, when we're in a chronic stress state, or when we encounter RSD that can trigger that state, and if you have ADHD, PTSD, autism, Tourette's, you can find it hard to regulate between a heightened hyperaroused or hypoaroused response and the window of tolerance. If you are in a state of hyperarousal, where you have an overactivated nervous system, you need to practice grounding and down-regulating exercise, such as grounding. Putting your body close to the ground can be your foot on the grass or your body on it. Yoga, massage, we can reduce cortisols and increase serotonin. A walking meditation, walking in nature. Breath work. Box breathing is really good for regulating anxiety. And having fidget toys to release the excess energy. Weighted blanket, slowing down a movement, and being in an environment where there's low stimulation in all of your senses, where you have essential oils, salt lamp, and you can do some journaling. If you are in a state of hypoarousal and need to activate and upregulate your nervous system, a good way to do this is with energizing music, the kind that you can get up and go with. Connecting with a pet or a person, and what this gives us also is a burst of oxytocin that promotes a sense of bonding and well-being. A cold shower, laughter, sharing funny moments, and laugh about silliness with a friend or family. Gentle rocking, if you have a cocoon chair, that's perfect for it. Being out in nature, sunshine and water, sand on a beach can help us feel connected to the world bigger than the four walls we often spend our time in. Aside from regulating our nervous system, we need to be mindful of the support we need to not only manage but thrive with ADHD. All these strategies have been proven with scientific research, beginning from the AM, where you start your day with self-compassion, acceptance of your ADHD traits, and have a good breakfast before you take your medication if you do, as this determines whether your meds can work the best it could. And to ensure you drink enough water daily, as stimulants can dehydrate us and also take away some of the electrolytes that are important for our body. Try and get some bright light to regulate your circadian rhythm, at least 2 hours from the time you wake up. And then through to the PM, where you regulate your nervous system, noticing your hunger, thirst, and stress cues through some form of movement, perhaps being in nature, staying grounded and in the moment, and decompress from the stress of the day. And try to practice good sleep hygiene. What this looks like is to have no screens at least 2 hours before you sleep, and have low light in the room, never fluorescent lights by the way. As for a monthly reminder, women with ADHD also need to be mindful of the impact of hormones on our well-being during the week before and sometimes after too, depending on which stage of life you're at. It's a good idea to track your cycle and log your symptoms and speak to a specialist with knowledge of ADHD if you have any concerns. Aside from this, supplements that have been shown to help in ADHDers and are often at reduced levels are omega-3, vitamin B, vitamin D, iron, magnesium, many more. But please consult your GP to consider the dosage that are right for you. Bringing it all together. ADHD rarely travels alone. So what we need to do our best job and live our best lives can be different from one person to another, because we all grow up in different circumstances. There has been a startling rise in adult ADHD and autism diagnosis due to the gender, ethnicity, cultural and sexuality bias in diagnosis. Life after diagnosis, you are going to be okay, but please pace yourself, seek out mental health and emotional health support, and understand that you are more than your diagnosis. Before you go in to have a conversation about workplace adjustments for your ADHD, you need to know your strengths, the type of skills you want to bring to life if you have not already in your career, and have some idea of the challenges you need support with. But frame this via a strengths-based approach rather than a deficit approach. I went through solutions that help in getting ADHDers into jobs, staying employed, and feeling belong at work. and the intersectional areas in our lives that we don't often look into enough in association with neurodivergence. I also gave some practical day-to-day adjustments that can make a real difference to ADHDers. I took you through the strategies as well as the process for asking for support at work so you can be your best self. I also included what is a comprehensive summary of ADHD and well-being, which deserves an entire course by itself because it is necessary but often neglected area in our lives. All in all, I hope you lean into your support community, including the ones on the ADHD Girls platform, to help you thrive with your ADHD. Thank you for being on this journey with me. Till next time.